"You got a call sign, Princess." The bay laughed, every man in it. 23 lance corporals, staff sergeants, and 1 corporal on light duty found something to do with his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite nothing. Gunnery Sergeant Trent Whitaker folded his arms and let the moment sit. He had been running this bay for 3 years, and he knew exactly what 30 ft of fluorescent concrete and double-stacked racks could do to a person who didn't belong in them. He had assessed her from the moment she cleared the main hatch. Civilian business clothes, DOD lanyard, black nylon bag over one shoulder. Age he would estimate at early 30s, but being generous. She had, without knowing it, handed him the easiest audience setup of his week. Young, female, administrative, lost by all available evidence. He had been waiting for someone this easy for 2 months since the last IG visit had sent a 60-year-old man with reading glasses and a color-coded binder who at least commanded the procedural respect that age and bureaucratic authority tend to produce. This was something else entirely. The woman crossing toward him didn't flinch, didn't speed up, didn't look for an ally in the room. She walked the last 8 ft at the same pace she'd walked the first 8. And when she reached him, she produced a Department of Defense identification wallet from her jacket pocket. Not her purse, not a lanyard pocket, a jacket pocket, which meant she'd known where it was and didn't have to look for it. Held it open long enough for him to read the Doty Inspector General Field Investigator credentials and returned it without ceremony. "Good morning, Gunnery Sergeant." One sentence, no elevation in it, no edge, no performance of dignity, no attempt to establish turf. The bay had expected irritation, a young civilian woman getting her footing back, the voice going up half an octave, the badge held too long, the eyes moving around the room looking for someone sympathetic, some procedural anchor. They got a declarative sentence and a pair of eyes that didn't ask for anything from anyone in the room. Whitaker pivoted to his audience. He told them what he told every formation that had to deal with outside administrative intrusion. The Department of Defense sends investigators the way the Navy sends shore patrol, always looking at the wrong building, always arriving after the thing they're looking for has already moved on, and always convinced that the clipboard is more powerful than the people who run the deck. He gestured at Sloan. This young woman, this civilian, this hazing complaint made flesh, and the bay produced the right amount of laughter for a gunnery sergeant who was working clean. Nothing he could be written up for. Nothing that would survive a transcript. Just a room full of men who understood which way the air was moving and adjusted accordingly. She was irrelevant before she crossed 10 ft of the place. She didn't appear to know that. She moved to the first footlocker row and crouched at the hinge of the near locker, compact camera out. Her go bag came off her shoulder and settled on the edge of the footlocker beside her. The bag sat in the fluorescent light with nothing on it. No name tape on the handle. No department sticker. No worn patch outline. No hotel loyalty tag from a government travel booking. Not the faded ghost of anything that had ever been attached. It was a black nylon bag that could have belonged to anyone and identified itself as belonging to no one. Whitaker was mid-sentence to the lance corporal beside him when he glanced at it. His sentence didn't break, but he glanced. At the far end of the bay, near the hatchway that led to the head, Battalion Sergeant Major Elias Park had been standing for 4 minutes on his standard morning circuit. He watched Whitaker perform for 2 of those minutes and then stopped watching because he had seen Whitaker perform for 3 years and it had stopped requiring a response. Then he watched the civilian. He watched her move through the footlocker row. He watched her set the bag down. He watched the way she crouched, weight balanced, the crouch of someone who could hold it for a long time without deciding in advance how long. His circuit stopped. She was, by his estimate, somewhere around 30 years old. That was not what concerned him. What concerned him was the bag. He had not moved from the hatchway. He stood there after the bay began to empty, after Whitaker walked out through the main hatch, still working the audience on his way through, after the junior enlisted drifted back to morning police call and the noise level dropped to a normal operational hum. When the room was clear enough, Park took out a small green notebook from his left breast pocket. He opened it to a fresh page. He wrote one word. He closed it. He had been doing this for 26 years, and he knew that the things worth writing down were the things that didn't fit the pattern. A civilian DOD investigator with no identifying informa. Tian on her kit moving through a Foot Locker row with the economy of someone who had done it before. That didn't fit the pattern, not the youth, not the gender, the kit. He put the notebook away and began walking again. 2 days later, Whitaker arrived at the battalion administrative office with First Lieutenant Cho from the battalion legal shop and 2 staff sergeants standing witness behind him. He was cold this time. No performance for an audience, no theater. He had done his reading on IG access limitations in the 2 days since she'd arrived, had spent an evening with the regulatory framework, and he had found what looked like a legitimate procedural seam. If the JAG officer could contest Sloan's document access authority on technical grounds, the investigation stalled in administrative review while the clock ran. It was clean. It was legal. It was the kind of move that worked against people who hadn't anticipated it, which, given that she was a civilian investigator who appeared to be somewhere around 30 years old, he had every reason to believe covered his target. He arrived with a lawyer because he was not performing anymore. He was trying to win a procedural argument, and he had chosen his ground carefully and brought the right tool for it. The lance corporal at the admin desk processed requests and tried to become furniture. Her access authorization covers the physical space of the squad bay, Cho said. He was precise and unhurried. The cadence of someone reading from memory he's already verified. Access to personnel administrative records requires a separate command authorization under base legal procedures. Base Directive 417, subsection B. He cited the framework by number from his notes with the measured confidence of someone who had verified the citation that morning and found it solid. He was polite and technically real, and his argument was constructed the way arguments constructed by lawyers who done their homework tend to be constructed carefully sequentially with each premise in place before the next one. Whitaker stood behind him with his arms loose at his sides, the arrangement of a man who has delegated correctly and knows it. Sloan closed her green field notebook. She had been in the admin office for 11 minutes before Whitaker arrived. 11 minutes of cross-referencing records, noting discrepancies, building a sequence of locker inspection logs against the complaint timeline. The lance corporal at the desk had watched her work with the slightly dazed expression of someone who has just realized that the visitor they expected to manage is managing herself. She cited Title 10, United States Code, Section 1034 by paragraph. She cited the Inspector General Act of 1978, Section 6 of 1 and 6 of 4 from memory. The way someone cites a map grid they have run 3 times in the dark and would not need a map for a 4th. She cited DOD Directive 5106.01, paragraph 4.2. She did not look at any paper while she did this. She did not move her hands. She spoke the citations in a cadence that was not recitation. It was the cadence of someone reporting information they consider unremarkable. Information that has been sitting in working memory since before this conversation started and is simply now being retrieved. She finished and waited. Cho's pen had stopped moving before she reached the second citation. He looked at his notes once as though checking whether he had the right notes. He did. They just didn't help. The challenge had nowhere go. Her access stood. Through the corridor window outside the office, Sergeant Major Park had paused mid-walk. He stood at the glass for 8 seconds. He watched Cho realize his ground was gone. He watched the 2 staff sergeant witnesses exchange a look that contained no good answer. He watched Whitaker's effect remain controlled. No anger, no performance. The face of a man filing what just happened under a different category and moving on to the next attempt. And he watched Sloan stand with her shoulders dropped, hands open at her sides, weight distributed evenly on both feet, motionless in a room where every other person was physically restless. Cho clicking his pen, the clerk rotating in his chair, Whitaker's 2 staff sergeants shifting weight from foot to foot. She didn't shift, didn't adjust. The posture wasn't cultivated for calm, and it wasn't the stillness of someone suppressing reaction. It was something older than either of those. the body configuration of someone whose stillness had been trained in environments where movement was a liability, and it held the shape long after the environment changed. He had seen that posture before. He could not yet locate the context. Whitaker and Cho exited through the corridor. Whitaker separated from the lawyer at the first junction and walked to the exterior. He made a call on his personal phone, not the unit line. His voice, visible through the exterior glass, was controlled and deliberate. He said something short. Listened, then said 3 words, of which the admin clerk at the window caught only one clearly. A name. Slocum. It meant nothing to the clerk. He forgot it before close of business. Sloan, already at the back of the admin office, had the first personnel file open before Whitaker's call was finished. She had 12 files requested. She pulled them in sequence. She did not look up when Whitaker's silhouette passed the exterior window on his way back inside. By day +5, Whitaker wasn't leading the campaign personally. He had handed the current to his junior NCOs and let the Bay's social gravity run it without him. The architecture was simple and it was clean. Whenever Sloan moved through the space, someone fell in beside her. Someone narrated. Someone made it a performance without making it anything that could survive a written complaint. They split the target between her youth and her gender and found the combination comfortable, even natural. She looked too young to be a serious investigator, which made the theater easier to justify, which made the contempt more comfortable to perform, which made the Bay feel like it was running itself, which was exactly the mechanism Whitaker had designed from 2 bays away while keeping himself off any record that would mat her later. PFC Henry Dell, 19 years old, the most junior Marine in the Bay, was designated Sloan's personal escort for the afternoon. Lance Corporal Hamilton handed him a laminated base map and told him to make sure the inspector didn't get lost. The Bay found this appropriately funny. Dell was mortified in the particular way of someone who knows he is both the prop and the audience for the same joke, but doesn't have the rank to decline either role. He followed her at a distance of about 6 feet, map in hand, not sure whether to speak or simply evaporate from the situation entirely, and let the map drift to the floor. She moved through the Bay and wrote continuously in the green notebook. The hand was compact and fast, more abbreviation than longhand, the writing of someone who has been doing this long enough that the system is invisible. She logged locker designators from the wall plates. She logged names from blouses as she passed the lance corporals, last names from the chest, in under 2 seconds per man. Dell's name she picked up from his blouse while he was standing 3 ft behind her, still holding the laminated map and not sure what to do with his eyes. The 3 lance corporals working the escort routine had given up around the 40-minute mark. They had run out of material. She had not provided them with any. She moved through the Bay at her own pace, wrote in the notebook at her own pace, and produced nothing they could work with. No frustration, no confusion about the physical space, no moment of visible uncertainty that could be narrated into comedy. The best comedy requires a subject who responds to the premise, and Sloan had not appeared to receive the premise at all. Hamilton tried twice more before the effort stopped feeling worth his time. The Bay's attention drifted to its actual work, and the escort routine dissolved on its own. "You're Dell." A statement, not a question. She didn't look up from the notebook. He stared at the back of her head for a moment. Then she turned to a new page. The blank sheet went on top of whatever she'd been writing. Dell's name was now behind a clean separator. Whatever the notebook captured going forward would not sit in the same visible sequence as his entry. She continued writing on the new page as though the page turn was standard documentation procedure. Nothing to explain, nothing to draw attention to. Dell stood there with the laminated map in his hands and didn't understand what she'd done. In a federal investigative record, context is placement. She knew that. He didn't. He was 19 years old and he'd been handed to her as a prop, and she'd already moved him to a place the prop handlers couldn't reach. The lance corporals lost interest eventually. The entertainment value degraded without a rotating audience, and they had actual duties. Dell drifted toward the far end where his own gear maintenance had been waiting since morning. Sloan closed the notebook at the end of the footlocker row and looked up across the full length of the bay. 60 ft of concrete and stacked racks and fluorescent light. The last lance corporal disappearing through the far hatch. Her expression hadn't changed from the expression she'd walked in with on day 0. Not tightened, not hardened, not softened. Not a single degree of drift in 5 days. She had logged 41 names in the notebook. She had logged one locker designator in the back section that had nothing to do with a hazing complaint. She had turned a page to protect a 19-year-old kid who hadn't asked for protection and wouldn't know he'd received it. 5 days of productive work running underneath 5 days of theater. Whitaker was not present in the bay on day +5. He had not been present for any of it. After the JAG office failure, he had made himself procedurally clean. Whatever ran in this bay now ended 3 levels below him on paper. He was getting smarter, and anyone watching the pattern closely enough could feel the intelligence in the absence. The specific texture of a problem that had started improvising. They handed a 19-year-old kid a laminated map and made him the joke. The woman they were laughing at had already turned a page to protect him, and not one of them knew it. Stay with us. On day +9, Whitaker filed a formal complaint with the base legal office. It was detailed and professionally formatted and CC'd to 3 offices: Base Legal, the base commanding officer, and the DODIG regional field director. It alleged that Sloan's document requests constituted unauthorized command climate interference. On paper, it was real because he had found a real procedural seam. Her access to the battalion administrative wing was suspended pending legal review. His assumption was that a 30-year-old civilian investigator, cut off from her filing pipeline, would need her regional director to intervene. The intervention would take days she couldn't afford. He had done the math carefully. He believed it was correct. He was wrong by approximately 45 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds, the battalion executive officer, informed her of the complaint in the CO's anteroom. He was procedural and visibly uncomfortable with the position he'd been placed in. He handed her a printed copy, let her read it without narrating it, and asked 3 questions with the formality of an officer who has been handed a procedure he did not design and does not fully endorse. Did she have documentation of her original authorization? Understood. Did she wish to submit a formal response at this time? Sergeant Major Park, 3 syllables. She was indicating the routing she would use. Was there anything else she wanted to add before he formalized the restriction? Request noted. She stood and left. Reynolds stared at the door for a full 5 seconds after it closed. 7 words across 3 questions. He had kept waiting for the rest of the sentences, for the elaboration that people produce when they are defending a position and need the listener to understand the full context of their defense. The sentences had not come. Clear's throat. His clerk, who had witnessed the exchange from the adjacent desk, also had no read on what had just happened. Both men sat with it for a moment and moved on because neither of them had a category to file it under. She was in the copy room annex 10 minutes later. The administrative wing restriction had not yet cleared battalion HQ routing. The paperwork was still moving through the system, still 3 bureaucratic steps from the point where it would have been able to stop her. She ran 47 pages from the personnel and communications files she had already pulled that morning. Systematic. No wasted motion. The camera moving through the documents at the pace of someone executing a protocol that has been memorized and refined. The copy room lance corporal processed incoming requests at the desk and watched her in his peripheral vision, and had no idea what he was watching. 3 envelopes came out of her jacket pocket, pre-addressed in her own handwriting. One to the DODIG regional director, one to a judge advocate general's office, one to a third address that clerk couldn't fully read because her hand covered the final line of it while she wrote and stacked. She affixed postage from a book she was already carrying in her jacket pocket, not a government postage meter, her own stamps, a detail that meant she had planned to send mail from this assignment before she arrived, and gathered all 3 under her left arm. The clerk watched her leave with the envelopes. He could read 2 destination addresses clearly. On the third, partially obscured, the return city in the upper left corner was visible for 1 second before she shifted the stack. Washington, D.C. He recognized the zip code vaguely as belonging to a federal building he couldn't name. He moved on. The envelopes. The restriction hit the battalion administrative office at 14:15 hours. The admin lance corporal logged the access suspension, flagged the relevant file drawers, and updated the duty roster according to the posted procedure. He did the job correctly and completely. He did not know that 47 pages from the relevant files had been photographed and documented 90 minutes before the suspension was formally logged. He would not know for another 11 days, when the investigation's operational designation changed, and its timeline became part of the public evidentiary record. By then, the paperwork he had dutifully filed was a footnote in a case that had already been built without it. Whitaker learned of the envelopes on day +22 from one of the sources he had been cultivating since day +2. By then, 3 separate federal offices had received and logged the contents. By then, the restriction he had filed to create was already irrelevant to the case's trajectory. He had moved the game pieces on a board that had been decided several turns earlier, and the decision had been made in a copy room annex while he was still on his personal phone in the exterior. Dropped into the base outgoing mail bag 2 minutes before Whitaker's complaint formally cleared battalion routing. 3 documents were moving through a federal mail system. Whatever was inside them would arrive before anyone in this battalion knew they had been sent. Sergeant Major Park had 6 entries in the green notebook by day +14. He reread them before 600 hours at the metal desk in the battalion sergeant major's office under one lamp. The base still quiet outside. The bag with no identifiers. The posture in the admin office during Cho's failed challenge. The monosyllabic answers to Reynolds that totaled 7 words across 3 questions. The precise economy of motion through the locker rows. 2 other entries that individually resolved to nothing but collectively pointed the way 6 compasses point when they agree. He closed the notebook. He took his personal cell phone, not the office line, not the secure unit line, and went to the secure phone room in the battalion corridor. PFC Dell was on sweeping detail in the main corridor when Sloan passed him on her way into the bay. He'd been watching her. The way 19-year-olds watch things they don't fully understand, peripherally, obliquely, never directly enough to commit to a conclusion. 2 weeks of that. But this morning something specific caught. He looked at the bag. He had seen every inspector and auditor and staff visitor on this base carry something identifiable, a name on a handle, a department sticker, a worn patch outline, a hotel tag from the last temporary duty assignment. 2 weeks of daily observation and his brain had finally finished its slow processing. He looked at the bag directly, the way you look at something when your brain wants to confirm what it has found, and understood that there was nothing on it, not a thread, not an imprint, not the ghost of anything that had ever been there. The bag had been manufactured, apparently, without the expectation that its owner would ever need to be identified from the outside. He stared 4 seconds longer than he meant to. He picked up the broom and kept sweeping. The observation had taken 2 weeks to arrive and 4 seconds to complete. That was how it worked with things you didn't have a category for. Your brain processed them in the background. And then one morning, it handed you a conclusion you hadn't known it was working on. Dell went back to sweeping. He didn't tell anyone what he'd noticed. He didn't have language for it yet. And he was 19 years old in a private first class, which meant the language he did have was not the right instrument for what he'd seen. He filed it under things he would figure out eventually. Park's call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Of those, 3 minutes and 51 seconds were silence on his end, waiting, listening to the 3-second pause, then the relay. Then the formal non-answer that was itself a complete answer. He had 26 years of experience reading the space between words in federal communications. The call ended with him knowing exactly what he needed to know and possessing none of it in a form he could put on paper. Earlier that morning, before Dell's corridor moment, Sloan had moved through the squad bay photographing 3 specific locker ID plates that had not appeared on the original hazing complaint list. She logged their designators in the back section of the field notebook, a grid visible for one frame before she closed the cover. The grid had shipping route designators in the margin. The hazing complaint was not what filled those back pages. She had been building a second record the whole time. The Bay had given her access to 38 lockers in 22 working days. She had used it. In the secure phone room, Park dialed MARSOC G1 at Camp Lejeune on his personal cell. He gave no name. He identified the inquiry as a credential verification and read out a badge series number he had memorized on day 0, standing at the far hatchway watching a civilian hold her credentials open long enough to be read. The G1 clerk took the number. 3 seconds of federal silence passed. Then, one moment, Sergeant Major. The clerk had used his rank. Park had not given his rank. He sat with the call ended for a moment and worked through what the 3 seconds had contained. Not a name. G1 wouldn't give him one without official authorization he hadn't requested through official channels. What he had was more specific. A MARSOC personnel file existed for that badge number. A G1 clerk had pulled it in under 10 seconds, and the 3-second pause was a complete sentence in the language of records offices. This file is flagged. This inquiry is locked. And I cognized who you are without you telling me, which means your rank, your unit, or something about the inquiry itself identified you before your voice did. He had 26 years of service. He knew what a 3-second pause from a MARSOC G1 clerk meant. He opened the notebook and wrote 2 words. The pen was deliberate. The hand was unhurried. He closed it, clipped his cover on, and walked toward the squad bay. He had not walked through it voluntarily in 2 weeks. The man who had been watching just stopped watching. A sergeant major with 26 years of service just made an off-record call and got a 3-second pause from a MARSOC clerk who knew his rank without being told it. He knows what she is now. The question is what he does with it, and what she's building in the back of that notebook that has nothing to do with a hazing complaint. Stay with us. That night on day +17 belonged to Sloan and no one else. The BOQ room was standard issue. Single bed, metal desk, 1 lamp, curtains drawn against the base exterior lights. She was still in civilian clothes with her boots on, which meant she hadn't decided to sleep yet. The laptop was open on the desk. On the screen, a map, grid coordinates in NATO standard format, Eastern Syria. The date stamp in the corner of the archived file read 2023. She had been staring at it long enough for the screen to consider dimming. The element had gone in clean. That was the thing she always returned to first because the clean insertion was what made the rest of it hard to categorize as a failure. It was not a planning problem. It was not a bad brief. The safe corridor held for 36 hours. On the second night, someone moved wrong or someone talked or both. The 2 possibilities collapsed into each other during the investigation and never fully separated. The corridor closed at 1:30 hours, and for the purposes of everything that came after, the cause was irrelevant. The only relevant fact was the situation as it existed. 1 man down, 2 km of bad ground between them and the extract vehicle, and a window that had been closing for 11 minutes. 1 teammate down, not dead, but not moving under his own power. Ortega. 29 years old, larger than the operational profile had accounted for, which was not a complaint, but a number she had computed in the first 8 seconds of carrying him and then set aside because the number was irrelevant. The only relevant numbers were the distance and the window. She walked. "I'm sorry," Ortega said somewhere around the 1st kilometer. He meant it the way men mean things they don't have full language for yet. "Stop talking. Keep your legs moving." He did and didn't say anything else for the rest of it. And she was grateful for that in the particular way you are grateful for things during operations. Not with warmth, but with precision. Because gratitude in the moment is just another variable in the problem, and warmth costs energy you don't have. The vehicle held 11 minutes past the abort window. The driver held. She made it. The debrief ran 6 hours. She answered every question the same way, completely, precisely, without additional color. The after-action reports were thorough. The medical file on Ortega was thorough. The casualty documentation was thorough. What wasn't in any file was the specific texture of the 2nd kilometer, the fact that Ortega had been getting lighter, or that she had been telling herself he wasn't, or that somewhere in the last 300 m she had stopped calculating and started simply moving. Some parts of an operation belong to the people who were there, and they don't belong in documents because documents don't have the right container for them. The call sign came from the command debrief generated by someone in the regiment who had a precise sense of analogy and the authority to make it official. She had not named it herself. She never did. You don't name your own call sign. You do the thing. And the thing gets named by the people who had to watch it happen from a position of limited ability to intervene. That was how the taxonomy worked in the regiment, and it was accurate. A Mamba strikes fast, moves without sound, and does not stop once it commits. They gave her the name at age 27, MAMBA SIX. She had been carrying it for 3 years in compartments where it meant something operational, and in the current assignment where it meant nothing at all because nobody in the battalion administrative wing had heard it. And that was exactly how civilian cover was supposed to function. She closed the laptop. She didn't move immediately. She sat at the desk with her hands flat on her thighs, weight distributed, shoulders level, hands open on her legs. It was the same configuration she'd held in the admin office during Cho's failed challenge. Not designed for comfort, not a calming technique, not a decision she was aware of making. It was the resting state of a body trained for silence in places where movement was a liability, and it had never fully untrained. She was in the BOQ room. She was also in some partial register, still somewhere on that first kilometer in eastern Syria, and that register did not require her attention to function. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside the closed laptop, screen up. One incoming message, no sender name, just a coordinate string. Eastern Mediterranean. She read it once. She recognized it immediately and completely, with a quality of attention that lived exactly between dread and readiness and had no single word for itself. She set the phone face down. She did not reply. The next theater had just knocked on the door of the current operation. By day plus 22, Whitaker's legitimate options were exhausted. The bureaucratic attack was in federal mail, out of his reach. The social campaign in the Bay had produced no visible effect on the investigator and had produced an unintended effect on PFC Dell that Whitaker didn't know about yet. The JAG maneuver had failed in the first 10 minutes of contact. He had one move remaining: remove her documentation capability. If she couldn't photograph, she couldn't build the evidentiary record. If she couldn't build it, the investigation stalled. It was not subtle, and it was not procedurally defensible, and he had arrived at it because he had run out of moves that were either of those things. He knew her afternoon pattern from 4 weeks of passive observation. He knew which days the Bay ran light gear maintenance days, midweek, when the lance corporals were occupied with their own tasks, and the NCOs had more latitude in their movements. He chose one of those days, when 2 junior Marines were running gear maintenance at the far end of the Bay, present enough to be witnesses if he needed witnesses, far enough away to seem irrelevant. And he walked in with the certainty of a man who has been the heaviest object in every room he has occupied for 22 years of service. She was photographing a footlocker interior at the eastern wall row. Camera steady, no wasted motion. He stepped forward and took it from her hands. One clean motion, no verbal warning, no preamble. He stepped back with the camera. Her hands came back to her sides, open, visible, neutral. Nothing in them and nothing on her face to suggest that what just happened was other than expected. 22 years, he said, not to her specifically, to the Bay, to the air, to whatever record he believed he was establishing. 4 theaters. You want to know how many men I've put in the ground so that people with government lanyards can do their paperwork in buildings with electricity and locks on the doors. Civilians didn't understand what this unit protected, what they did in the dark so that people carrying government lanyards could do their paperwork in daylight, in buildings, in safety, without understanding the cost of that safety or who paid it. IG investigations built on anonymous complaints had ended careers that deserved better, had corroded units that were functioning correctly, had introduced paperwork into places where paperwork was not the primary instrument of survival. I've buried men whose names are on that wall, he he said, "and I am not going to let an anonymous complaint corrode this battalion from the inside." He talked at a volume designed to carry through the bay without reaching the building exterior, and he kept going. She listened. She did not interrupt him. She did not adjust her weight from one foot to the other. She did not look away. She gave him the full attention of someone who is watching a process run to completion and does not need to intervene in it. Somewhere during the speech, he glanced at her go bag on the edge of the footlocker, hunting for something to use. A department logo, a visible title, a name on a tag, anything that would hand him a handle on who she actually was. The bag had nothing on it, not a label, not a patch outline, not a faded thread of anything that had ever been there. He looked away from it as though it had briefly confused him mid-sentence and kept talking. He didn't understand what he just looked at. He would understand it in 6 days on a parade deck in a formation silence that no one present would forget. When he finished, Sloan held her gaze on him for exactly the time it takes to confirm that a sequence has completed and there is nothing more coming from it. Then she smiled. Small, private, nearly clinical, the expression of someone watching a predicted outcome arrive on the exact schedule she had projected weeks ago. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant." She had left him with the camera because the camera was more useful in his hands than in hers. She had photographed what she needed to photograph. The last frame on the card, the foot locker interior, taken in the fraction of a second before his hand closed around the camera, had already captured what the evidentiary chain needed. She had not taken that photograph accidentally. She turned and walked out of the bay. No camera, no hurry, no backward look. She left him standing in the center of the room holding a piece of federal evidence, a government-issued camera removed by force from a credentialed federal investigator during an active investigation. He stood there for 30 seconds before he fully understood what was in his hands. At the far end of the bay, the 2 Marines on gear maintenance had gone very still. One of them was Dell. He watched Whitaker stand alone in the center of the empty bay with the camera in his hand for a long moment. Then he reached into his cargo pocket and took out his personal phone. The MARSOC operational message was generated upstream at a level Whitaker could not reach in response to 3 sealed envelopes that had left this base 11 days earlier, and 1 off-record call placed 9 days before that. The message amended the investigation's operational designation from IG civilian cover to a named counterintelligence operation and listed the lead investigator by full rank, name, and call sign. Sergeant Major Park had chosen to read it at morning formation. He had chosen to read it slowly. He had been waiting for the right moment for 9 days. And this was it. The formation assembled. The commanding officer present. Whitaker squared up in his position of prominence, and every man in the company about to learn what they had been looking at for 28 days. 600 hours on the parade deck. Standard administrative morning brief. The battalion company mustered in formation. The commanding officer standing to one side. The company at ease. The morning light flat and gray across the concrete. Sloan stood at the formation edge in civilian clothes as she had on other formation mornings when she'd observed without participating in the military geometry. Her go bag sat on the ground beside her, black and sterile in the morning light. Whitaker was squared up in front of his Marines, prominent, forward, the arrangement of a man who has occupied this position on 300 formation mornings and intends to occupy it on 300 more. He had not looked at her. Park produced a printed operational message, folded once, MARSOC letterhead visible from the front row, and read the administrative items first. Routine items, routine pace. The standard cadence of administrative morning briefs that generations of Marines have learned to receive without activating full attention. Nothing in his face or his delivery suggested that the next item was different in any way. Then he reached it. He read it at the pace that orders deserve because orders have weight and weight requires pace, and these particular words were going to take their time. Captain Cassandra Sloan, United States Marine Corps, Marine Special Operations Regiment, Designated Investigative Authority, Counterintelligence Operation, call sign MAMBA 6, he finished. The formation did not move. Even the wind seemed to hold its position. Park folded the message once along the original crease. He looked at Whitaker, 1 second level direct. Then he turned to face Sloan at the formation edge and rendered a full salute, held at duration. The salute that a sergeant major renders to a commissioned officer, extended long enough for the rank differential to be unmistakable to every man on the parade deck. He held it. Every Marine in the formation watched. After a beat, long enough for the understanding to move through the ranks like current through a wire, they followed. 200 men and the commanding officer saluting a woman in civilian clothes at the edge of a parade deck. She returned it, clean, crisp, full duration. Then she lowered her hand and looked at Whitaker. 8 seconds, 4 stages. The first was confusion. He was still parsing the rank, the unit designation, the call sign, the MARSOC letterhead on a message being read at his formation. The second was disbelief. She was 30 years old. She had been in this bay for 28 days carrying a civilian lanyard and a green notebook and a bag with no name on it. And none of it added up to what Park had just read aloud on the parade deck in front of his Marines. The third was recognition. Every incident from the past 4 weeks assembled at speed and inverted simultaneously. The bag, the statute citations delivered from memory in the admin office, the sealed envelope sent before the restriction took effect, the smile in the bay when he'd taken the camera, the monosyllabic answers to Reynolds. The word princess on day 0 of a counterintelligence operation he'd been actively participating in from the antagonist's position the entire time. The fourth was horror, the camera. He had removed a government-issued camera from the hands of a MARSOC captain during an active counterintelligence investigation. He had been holding it for 6 days in his quarters. MAMBA SIX, he barely said it, barely audible. The loaded magazine dropped from his rifle and hit the parade deck in the formation silence. No one reached for it. Behind him, where her go bag sat on the ground at T. The formation edge. Every Marine who could see it understood in one compressed second what they had been looking at for 4 weeks. Not civilian minimalism. Not the absent-mindedness of someone too young to have developed professional habits. Tradecraft. The kit of someone who operates in environments where a name on a handle is a liability that gets people killed. They had been reading it as youth. It had been professional sterility from day 0, and it had been in front of them every single morning. 2 military police NCOs stepped toward Whitaker's position on the parade deck. As they walked him off the deck, Park fell in beside Sloan. He said it quietly, angled away from the formation. "The Maridaki's file is on your desk." She did not look him. 1 syllable, flat mission calm cadence. "Copy." This operation wasn't finished. The next one was already open. The counterintelligence findings moved through the battalion command structure on day +35 with the speed of institutional machinery that had been waiting for authorization to run. The OPSEC leak traced to 3 active duty personnel and 1 civilian contractor connection through a maritime logistics firm registered in Cyprus, a subsidiary of a Piraeus-based shipping network. The network belonged to a man named Lazaros Maridakis. UCMJ charges were cut before noon. The battalion commanding general received the briefing in the CO's conference room and said very little in the specific way of a senior officer absorbing information that makes him angry in a direction he cannot yet point. The camera Whitaker took on day +22 had been recovered from his quarters pursuant to the MP action on day +28 and processed as physical evidence. Its last photograph, captured in the fraction of a second before his hand closed around it, showed a foot locker interior, a serial number, an identification card, and 1 piece of equipment belonging to one of the 3 charged personnel. The photograph was the physical link that closed the evidentiary chain. Whitaker had held it for 6 days, delivered it personally on the day of his arrest, and never understood what he was carrying. The formal complaint he had filed on day +9, the action that suspended Sloan's administrative access, was formally expunged from the command record, rescinded retroactively. The paperwork required 11 minutes. On the afternoon of day +35, An investigating officer's brief reference to corroborating witness statement submitted on day plus 23, time-stamped 2200 hours. The statement documented what the witness had observed in the squad bay on day plus 22. The approach, the confrontation, the camera taken from the investigator's hands. The I.O. described it on the record as essential to the evidentiary case. PFC Henry was called into the I.O.'s office and told what his statement had accomplished. He was handed a written commendation. He read it twice, slowly, and then read a specific sentence in it a third time. He was 19 years old, and it was the first official document anyone had ever handed him that said he had done the right thing when nobody required him to. And nobody would have noticed if he hadn't. He folded it carefully along the original crease and put it in his left breast pocket. The I.O. mentioned, as Dell was standing to leave, that the investigating officer who had reviewed the statement had noted a specific detail. The time stamp, 2200 hours on day plus 23. The bay had been quiet for 2 hours by then. The gear maintenance shift long over. Dell had gone back to the barracks, thought about what he'd seen in the bay that afternoon, and then sat down and typed it out. No one had asked him to. No one had told him it would matter. He had simply understood, without the benefit of rank or institutional authority or any particular training in what evidence looked like, that what Whitaker had done was wrong, and that writing it down while he still remembered it precisely was the correct thing to do. Sloan submitted the completed investigation package that afternoon. Hazing findings, counterintelligence documentation, full evidentiary chain as a single integrated report. 247 pages. Her name was on the cover. Captain Cassandra Sloan, United States Marine Corps. MAMBA SIX was in the header. A 19-year-old Marine picked up his personal phone at 2200 hours on day plus 23 and typed out what he had seen. He didn't know it would matter. He didn't know what she was. He just knew that what Whitaker had done was wrong, and he wrote it down when nobody told him to and nobody was watching. That statement closed the case. If this hit you the way it was meant to, you're exactly why this channel exists. Stay for the coda. 21 days later, on day plus 56, she was alone at the memorial wall. Granite panels, names running at shoulder height along the exterior of the base. Each name cut clean and even into the stone. She moved along them until she stopped. She ran one finger along a single panel, one name in the stone, and held it there for a moment. The audience did not see which name. They already knew. She picked up the go bag, still clean, still sterile, still carrying nothing that would tell anyone who she was or where she had been or what she had carried on a dark kilometer in eastern Syria 3 years ago. She turned from the wall and walked through the base gate and out of frame. The base was quiet at this hour. 2 junior Marines on exterior watch saw her go. Neither of them knew who she was, which was exactly right. She had told him to stop talking and keep his legs moving. He had. The wall kept its own record of what that cost. Cut, exterior, a commercial port, Piraeus, Greece. Dawn light moving across flat water. A man stands at the stern of a cargo vessel watching the harbor go light. His phone rings. He answers. The caller speaks 2 words in Greek before the line disconnects. Phidia harita, the snake is coming. Lazaros Maridakis closes the phone. He looks at the water for a long time. It is flat and bright, and somewhere across it, a 30-year-old woman with no name on her back is reading a file that has his name on the cover. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.